You good?
Yeah, so hi everyone, and thanks for joining us for our Facebook chat. We will be hosting these sessions every Friday at 10 a.m. to discuss some of the common themes caregivers are experiencing through this pandemic. Today, we will spend about 20 to 30 minutes discussing long distance caregiving. We encourage you to ask questions in the comment section below, and we'll do our best to answer as we go. My name is Miranda, and I am a registered social worker on the Society Support Team.
Good morning, everyone. It's Cindy Bond, education specialist, community education specialist with the Alzheimer's Society. Such a long title.
It is. Well, and having a break in the middle of the week doesn't help.
It was nice, though, I gotta say.
It was. I keep thinking it's like Tuesday now, though.
I know. Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad to be doing this topic today about long distance caregiving, because I feel like it's something more and more caregivers are feeling like they're experiencing just during the pandemic, right? So a lot of the caregivers that I'm speaking to that are long distance caregivers will talk to me about how really what that definition of caregiving is, right? When you think about a caregiver, I think a lot of people will say things like preparing meals, taking their person to appointments, all of that in person work as a caregiver. But really, there's a lot more going on than that in person. There's a lot of behind the scene things, right? Behind the scene things, managing appointments, gathering information. There's just so many things that caregiving encompasses. And I think during the pandemic, many people are still not able to see their person if maybe their person lives in care, or it's those caregivers who are typically in person a lot of the time are kind of long distance caregivers right now too. So it's a very interesting time. And I think those caregivers are starting to realize, if they hadn't already, the importance of all that behind the scenes as well as the in-person.
That's very true. So today we want to touch on all those things. We want to talk about long distance caregiving, but even if you're in the same city and it's during this time of COVID-19 and you want to stay in touch with your person who, I don't know, every care facility seems to have a bit of a different policy right now, right, Miranda? So
it seems to be that way. Yeah, there's some care homes that it sounds like they're allowing visitors once a week. Mm-hmm. Other ones are once a month, and some are still not at all. So
right. So we want to make sure we incorporate everybody into this topic, whether you live in a different city or the same city and not seeing your person. There are a ton of things that can be done behind the scenes with technology or without. So we're trying to touch every unique situation in half an hour. So bear with us.
We'll do our best.
Yes, we're going to try very hard. So that being said, let's start with call, write. I love the writing letters. It's such a generation, right, of writing. We don't do that anymore.
Absolutely.
But also
yeah, and writing letters, you can also include things like pictures, and I'm hearing a lot of caregivers leaving packages for their person, whether they're doing groceries for their person and not interacting much in person, or they're writing letters and sending pictures and care packages to care homes.
I love that. Yes, I did hear from a caregiver who goes for hikes and whatnot, and their person with a diagnosis cannot join them for various reasons. So they take pictures of their hikes and they share them that way, which I thought was so great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I like what you said about FaceTime. Seeing a person over a screen might be better than even a phone call if it's possible. I know some caregivers are having some struggle if their person lives alone, or even if they maybe live in care, and just scheduling someone to come and help get that set up for them if they're not able to. So there is a little bit of a barrier there for some people. But if it's workable, I think it's a really great alternative to a phone call to be able to see the person and really get reassurance for the caregiver that they look okay, they be able to see their emotions and yeah.
Yes. Using all the senses, right? When we communicate helps. I like to, I spoke to a caregiver, and I think I mentioned this on another one of our live chats, was they do things over FaceTime, like cooking together. So the caregiver, another caregiver is there, and they bake cookies. And I wanted to ask you, Miranda, about Netflix. So you can watch the same movie at the same time.
Yeah, you can.
So that, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I think that's fairly new. I haven't tried it out myself yet, but yes, you can choose to watch Netflix together now, which is
Yeah.
great.
I haven't tried it either, but yeah, it does sound really cool.
Yeah.
Depending on where your person is and what their capabilities are, Netflix might be a thing where, yeah,
Absolutely.
still living independently.
Well, and I really like what you said about doing an activity over a FaceTime. Even you could work it out over a phone if you had to as well, to do an activity. Many caregivers that I talk to, and again, this is going to depend, vary depending on where the person is in their journey, but communication can be a little bit of a challenge, a little bit more difficult when maybe your person's not able to respond and have that conversation flow in the same way they used to. A lot of caregivers I speak to will say, I can't ask them much. They don't have an answer for me. Maybe they're even losing some of their longer term memories. So it's reminiscing can be hard too. So doing something in the present, right? Like baking, as you said, as an example, or even reading a book together or watching Netflix. It's a way that you can be present with your person. And it also gives the caregiver something to talk about, right? Sometimes people struggle to just hold a conversation without that feedback, without that back and forth. So doing an activity can be a really good way to give you something to talk about.
Exactly. I like that. Because somebody living with dementia, like you say, sometimes that back and forth in a conversation is very difficult for them. And I think it's very natural for caregivers to ask a lot of questions like, how are you? And what did you do today? And how is so-and-so? And for somebody living with dementia, that can be a little overwhelming and hard to answer all those questions. So, right, having that activity kind of bridges that, gives you something to talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's not dependent on their memory or even their communication skills in some cases, right?
Yeah. And there's still so much value and meaning and just spending some time together, regardless of what you're doing, right? I think people living with dementia find comfort in hearing the voice of loved ones. And yeah, I think it's important to stress that there's still a lot of meaning in that.
There is. It's all about connection, right? Yeah, just connecting with that person in some way. And it could be as simple as they love birds. So you drop off a book or have it delivered, which everything's being delivered these days, about birds, and you go through it together. It could be as simple as that. Or they love crosswords and you're asking them, okay, what's a 4-letter word for, I don't know, whatever, right? And if they're able to do that, so it's the connection that's important. What would you say in terms of, not just connecting with the person with dementia, but the behind the scenes stuff? Like what kind of stuff can a long distance caregiver do, would you say?
Yeah. Well, there's so much. It's hard to even answer that question because there's so many things it can be. We're pretty strong advocates of having one person talking to the formal support team, so doctors, nurses, that can be a really great role for a long distance caregiver to book those appointments and do all that kind of stuff behind the scenes. That way, it's one less thing that the in-person caregiver has to do, right?
For sure.
I also hear fairly often that long distance caregivers are agents on legal documents, such as the power of attorney, even for the personal directive, right, which would allow the agent to make personal and medical decisions. There's many caregivers I talk to who are long distance and maybe share co-agency with the primary caregiver for those roles, so they can help take on responsibilities and also help make decisions, right?
Yes.
Those larger picture decisions with the rest of the family.
Yeah, I like that one person point of contact. So if that being said, one person can talk, like depending on how many siblings you have or how many people are involved in that informal care, which is typically family. When I say informal care, yeah, you could have one person doing everything legal. You could have one person having contact with the primary care network or the doctor. Another one for the social worker, if there's a social worker involved. I think it's important to note, though, that if you are the one and only person and you're long distance, this conversation is a little bit different in that you really have to know what your boundaries are, what I'm stealing this from Miranda. She said, what you're willing and able to do. I think that's important, to cut yourself some slack and say, yes, I might be able to do this, but I don't want to do this, or I'm not willing for whatever reason.
Yeah,
that's important. So delegating that task, if you're the one and only in the family, or you feel like you're the one and only, right? Perception is reality. So really being kind to yourself is really, really important. And I would say, if you're the one and only, plan.
yeah, and utilize the formal support teams, right? Of course, that looks a little bit different during a pandemic as services are a little bit more limited, but there are ways to be creative and connect with us here at the Alzheimer's Society. We're aware of, well, we try to be aware of all of the supports available, so we're more than happy to share those with you as well.
Yes. So building what we call your circle of care. So thinking of a circle visually, your person is in the middle. You're part of that circle as an informal. It could include neighbors. It could include more professional, like Meals on Wheels. Oh my goodness, UPS, because they deliver.
Yeah.
Could be, the list goes on, doctors, social workers, dentists, on and on, right?
Absolutely. Oftentimes the care team is a lot more than just family and close friends.
It's really important that it is. If it isn't, this is hard. This is, right? You need help. We're an advocate for that as well. It takes a village.
Absolutely. And the question that I usually ask caregivers isn't, can you do this? It's how long? How long can you do it without help? Right? Because caregiver burnout is something we hear about regularly. I would say even daily. So getting some help in place, not only for the person, but for yourself. It's just as important and just as valid that you deserve help too.
Absolutely. So don't hesitate. So that, I just want to go over to the planning part a little bit. So when I first started at the Alzheimer's Society in Calgary, I went to a support group, and one of the what I call gold nuggets that I learned during that support group, and I still talk about it today, was this particular care person. It was a spouse, and she had a binder. And in that binder was all the contact information for her informal and formal supports. which,
Wow.
right? And all the original documentation, legal documentation. So the will, because she was the agent, she had the
Personal directive and
yeah, and she had that all in one place. She had copies of it in a safety deposit box as a backup, but she had the originals in the binder. So if she had to get, you know, whether it was going to the doctor, she had her green sleeve in there, which is the goals of care. She had everything together. And every time she spoke to someone, she wrote down their name and put their phone number or email and it just became habitual for her. So she was so organized.
that's great. There are a lot of apps for care
Yes.
plans and things like that too. We can include some of them in the comments below. But I love that idea, especially, well, honestly, regardless of if you're a sole caregiver or you have a whole team of family and friends that are helping, keeping those documents organized is so important. Their appointments often have many questions and a lot of information going back and forth, and having it all with you and organized is a really great way to say, hey, you know what? I don't know, but I've got that information with me. Let me check. Right?
And I think too, it's important to note that if putting that information together seems like too much, like you're already overtaxed, you know, delegate that to someone else that might be able to do it, or talk to us. And you know, sometimes it's setting 1 hour a day aside to get work on one thing for the binder or to plan for.
Absolutely. And I like what you said about delegating. For the care team, formal or sorry, informal care team that's maybe closest to the person living with dementia or is the primary caregiver, delegating that to a long distance caregiver could be a really great task. Sometimes I find when I'm talking to long distance caregivers, they're not really sure how to help. They're doing their best to just trust and maybe not interfere too much with what the primary caregiver is doing. So sometimes long distance caregivers are actually waiting for you to give them a task. And I know it's one more job to have to explain a task to someone, but it can save a lot of time and help you feel like you have some support and help the long distance caregiver feel like they're contributing as well.
Yes, exactly. That one very common theme or feeling for a long distance caregiver is that guilt that they're not there. Yeah. And we would just so encourage that you do what you can, what you're able and willing. Those two need to go together. That's so important. And yeah, plan for what you can, but be very kind to yourself. That's so important. I know I speak to caregivers as well, and they say, you know what, I can talk to the lawyer. I like it. I enjoy that part of it, but I can't stand my mother's doctor or whatever, pharmacist or whoever it. I just can't. They just frustrate me. And that's fair, right? Do what you can. What you're willing and able to do is important.
Absolutely. And that's definitely how I word that questions to caregivers. What are you willing and able to do? Because there's a big difference.
And I like how you added, and for how long? Because there's no two people the same, right? Living with dementia, and you really don't know how long. So
yeah. Well, caregivers' line in the sand is different as well, right? What one caregiver is able and willing to do is going to look a lot different than another caregiver. Mm-hmm. So even within your own team, right? There's often one caregiver maybe taking on a significant amount of the responsibilities. Yes. And maybe another caregiver is comfortable with that, or maybe again, they're waiting for you to give them a task.
Yeah.
A personal example, my my grandfather is a person living with dementia, and he's quite far away from me, and he's quite far away from the rest of my family as well. So my grandma is his primary care partner. And one way that she has asked for the rest of the family to help is just to call regularly. And that gives her 20 to 40 minutes, depending on how long he's comfortable talking that day, just to she needs to do without having to watch over him because he's busy and engaged in a meaningful way on the phone. Right? It also makes him happier. So the evening after we're done talking to him, it's a more pleasant experience for her because he's in a good mood. Right?
I love that.
Yeah, but
Sure.
my grandmother communicating that with the family was really helpful to us because for me, it took away a little bit of the guilt that I wasn't there because I still feel like I'm meeting a need for her and for him.
Right. That's great. I like that. I like how you say it improves his mood. So that's important to note, to screen out those troubling messages. It's not the time necessarily to tell mom about Johnny was in a motorcycle accident and you're unemployed and worried about blah, blah, blah. And because your person's mood's going to be affected after that, and they may perseverate on that, right? That might be all they remember and they worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to be aware of emotional contagion and the communication strategies that we're using even from long distance, whether that's on the phone, FaceTime, what have you. Your person will still pick up on your emotions. They can hear it in your voice, right? And the topics that you're discussing. So keep it positive as much as you can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Going back to guilt for a minute, I think guilt is like worry. Both are okay if it helps you devise a plan or come up with something to move away from that guilt. So, for example, if you're feeling guilty about not visiting enough, for example, can you realistically do something about that? And if you can, great. But if you can't, then it's time to move away from that or to replace it with something more positive that you are able to do. So if you can't get on a plane right now, because I don't know this is fact, but I understand airfares in Canada are a little bit more expensive than they were.
And I think still a little bit restricted as well.
Yes, not everybody can just hop on a plane because maybe you're working. So that's not realistic. So you say, okay, well, I can't realistically see my person for several reasons, several valid reasons.
Yeah.
So yeah, moving away from guilt and saying to yourself, I'm doing the best I can is so important.
Absolutely.
The same with worry. Worry's the same. If you're worried about your person, are they going to get COVID while they're living in a care facility? So what do you need to know to alleviate that worry? What do you have control over? What do you need to know to help?
Right. It's not constructive to just sit in those negative feelings. We need to try and think them through, do something about them.
Right. That's very important.
Well, there's a really great comment on in the comment section here. It says, being a phone contact also helps to distract your person if they are starting to obsess, feel anger, etc. And I love that point. That is one I hear quite often. Sometimes the long distance caregiver, because they're not there day to day, the person, they're often a go-to person, right? Sometimes the primary caregiver gets blamed for things just because of the person living with dementia's perception about what's going on. Maybe they feel like they're being bossed around, what have you. So the long distance caregiver, I hear that a lot. If the person's starting to become agitated or angry, etc., a phone call to that person might really help. Right? And that's a wonderful way that a long distance caregiver can contribute to help make it a positive day. a good quality of life for that person. I love
Yeah, I
that.
love that comment as well. That's awesome. Speaking of, I know we're running out of time. It's such a big topic again. We're 25 after. But I just want to mention, if you are planning to travel, whether that is flying or driving, every province is a little bit different, I understand, in terms of their COVID-19 response to travel. So know before you go is really, really important. I would hate for anyone to get on a plane and get here and their person is in a care home and they couldn't see them. So really know before you go is, yeah, I reiterate that. It's just so important. What's happening? You need to know.
Yeah, well, and not even every province, yes. Sometimes cities have different rules as well. And furthermore, different care homes have different rules. So
yes,
do your investigation before you
for sure.
book
And
travel.
there is compassionate care leave, but we would say, yeah, talk to your employer about your situation ahead of time. And again, planning for that case scenario where you may have to drop everything and get on a plane. So what would that look like? What are your flex time policies at work? Talk to your doctor about compassionate care leave. Is that an option? What would that look like? Miranda and I did a little bit of investigating around compassionate care, and there are some things that are open to interpretation. Let's leave it at that. So please talk to your doctor and get more information about that.
Yep.
Yeah. Organize people, like if you have young children at home, lining up a possible caregiver for your children to help out, or a dog sitter ahead of time. You may never use them, but having that plan ahead of time so you're not panicked in the moment is something to consider as well.
Absolutely. Well, and that'll lead very well into next week's topic.
Yes.
Yes. So next week we will be talking about planning a trip, specifically by car.
Yes. Because it is a little bit different than plane.
Absolutely.
So thank you everyone for watching us today. Again, we're going to be talking about traveling by car. So planning that trip. It's all about planning. If you hear the undertones of what we've been talking about, plan, plan, plan. If you need us, please call to speak to a social worker one-to-one at 403-290-0110, or send an email to info@alzheimercalgary.ca, or we have live chat as well on our website. And our website is www.alzheimercalgary.ca. And if you like our video, please like and share. Please leave a comment. We always kind of check in and see if there's something that we need to add. If you're looking for a link to something, please leave a comment.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.